Hey guys, what's up? Nate here from Protoculture and Shadow Chronicles. Welcome back to Sonic Academy. Another video for you guys today. We are talking about EQ and a specific technique which I have been guilty of for the longest time. I was taught this. I have taught people this as well. And I'm referring to the technique of sweeping through frequencies to find problem frequencies that you can cut from your EQs. So we're going to discuss this. There's a number of things wrong with this, and I'm going to run through why you shouldn't be doing this most of the time. Let's dive in and take a look. Okay, so we're in Cubase. I've got a track up that I'm working on, and I'm going to show you just a typical scenario that I come across quite often with some producers. Where you're busy writing a track, and let's take something like the bass. I see this happening on the bass channels quite often. Let's take a listen to the track. Okay, cool. We're going to just zoom in on the bass quickly. And I'm going to just disable the EQ that I currently have there and these filters. We'll leave the compression and show box on. That's fine. Okay, so we've got a bass sound. So now what I see many people doing without even thinking is grab an EQ and let's drop a node in and turn up the Q value and sweep through. So let me just stop you right there. The first things first, you need to ask yourself, why are you adding this EQ in? If your answer is that you are looking for problem frequencies that you can cut out, you should not be doing this. If you can tell me that a sound is too boxy and you suspect that, you know, somewhere around 300 hertz or maybe 160 hertz, you want to kind of pull out something like that, then for sure, then go in there and go and have a look for those frequencies. But if you are just simply looking for problem frequencies that you can't hear in the context of your track, you shouldn't be doing this. Also, the other thing, like I said now, as I mentioned, the context of your track. If you play back the track and you can hear that there's something wrong, either when you're listening to referencing or whatever, by all means, start digging further. But if you are soloing a bass channel like this, playing it back and then searching for frequencies without listening to it in context of the rest of the mix, don't do it. So let's jump back into the scenario that we have here, whereby you put this narrow curve here, turn the Q up, turn the gain up, and then start dialing through the frequencies. So like that sounds pretty awful, and then you end up taking that out. So you'll dial back the gain. We'll go again. Dial this up, and this time I want you to just take a look carefully at what's happening to the output of the EQ. And I have seen people do this, 30 dBs of EQ to find a problem frequency. Can you see that this is currently clipping? So I guarantee you any single frequency that you find here is going to be awful because you're clipping it. It's distorted. It doesn't matter if it's a good frequency or a bad frequency. It's going to sound unpleasant because we're clipping it. Some of them are going to sound worse, but you shouldn't be hearing those massive differences if you weren't clipping it. So therein lies the first problem. So that one sounds pretty bad too. We'll cut that one out. If you are going to do this kind of sweeping thing, like I said, you don't want to be clipping these. The correct way to do that with a modern EQ would be to add in your node, do the band Q, and then hit the band solo for this channel. So here in Pro Q3, you have this little headphone thing. Yeah, most modern EQs have this functionality nowadays where you can solo a band, all the stuff from Brainworks. Shade has this as well, even Steinberg's frequency EQ. Grab this and then listen to the frequencies being highlighted here. So it's a lot harder now to be telling what's problem frequencies because quite often they aren't problem frequencies. It's because we're amplifying them that they become problems. Like 300 hertz, for example, people tend to take out a lot because they think it's where the mud of the track is. That can be the case, but if you adding it in there, it's unpleasant. If you take that away, I can't really tell you that there's too much of 300 hertz in there. It's only because we've added that in that it sounds unpleasant. And then when you cut it out, you are not realizing that you're taking out stuff that you should have left in the first place. So let's carry on with this. Like, we keep on adding cuts. And I often see people's EQs looking like this. Take out something like that. That sounds quite resonant as well. And so things carry on. It's often these spaces in between harmonics that are not supposed to be highlighted, but when you pull them out, they sound bad. And then you end up pulling them further, just kind of sucking more of the life out of that sound. So we've done a number of cuts. And like I said, this is not uncommon. I see this quite often, loads and loads of different cuts in the track without even really thinking about it. I wanted to show you something here. I'm going to take Shade and just load up a phaser filter inside of Shade. And let's set this to classic phase. We'll turn up the repeats. Does that look familiar? It's kind of what you're doing with the EQ when you are just adding in all these cuts. So this is really not something that you want when you are mixing important elements like a bassline in your track. So moving on. There's a number of other problems when it comes to this as well. Aside from the fact that you are EQing things that shouldn't really be EQ'd, you've kind of created problems for yourself, which you've then solved, and in doing so, created more problems for yourself. But another issue now is I'm going to just load up a analyzer and just take a look at the levels that are being produced here now. I'm going to disable the EQ. Take a look at the levels in the VU media. So watch what happens when we put the EQ back in again. You can see there's a marked reduction in volume when we add the EQ back in, obviously because we've cut out a whole bunch of content from this now. Now that's fine, only the only problem with this is now to keep the mix balanced. The only way that we can rectify this EQ change that we've made to keep this bass relevant in the track, we have to boost the levels on the bass track now. So now our bass is back to where it should be volume-wise, but now the issue with that is that in doing so, by boosting this track again, all of this content here and all of this frequency content down here that hasn't been EQ'd has essentially been raised up. So now you've got this stuff, which sounds kind of like it should, because it's at a right level, but we've unintentionally boosted the highs and the lows, which now could be causing problems with the kick drum here, and even as far up as the percussion. So we've got a click on the beginning of this bass that has been boosted now to the point that it might actually be causing issues and clashes with percussion elements in the track. So inadvertently, by fixing these issues which never needed to be fixed in the first place, we've actually created more issues in the mix, whereby we're going to have to go and then solve problems with the hi-hats, with the snare drums, etc. We might have to readjust the relationship of the kick with this because we've adjusted the levels of the subs now. So you can see, the more you kind of do these things, the more problems you create for yourself further down the line. It's kind of like a snowball effect. So don't ever do things like this without having an intelligible reason for doing it, or an educated reason for doing it. Like I said, there are frequencies that you can do cuts with. I find quite often you'll see, I have done so here, something like 160 hertz is often kind of a magic frequency for me. It kind of adds a bit of separation between the sub area and the lower mids. It often kind of just cleans up a sound for me slightly, but not always. But that's somewhere that you can go to do this kind of stuff. But generally speaking, I try to these days aim for more broadband EQ. I quite often do it via channel strips now as well. I mean, the sweep thing I used to do a lot when I was studying at college because we had analog desks. So you're working with a 4-band parametric EQ, you could sweep around without creating this kind of Swiss cheese effect with your audio like you do with digital EQs. The other problem with doing these kind of cuts that we have here is if your music is dynamically moving around as far as chord progressions and stuff is concerned, a lot of these resonances that you are suppressing here actually don't apply when the key changes. So you'd really want to be doing this dynamically rather than doing these cuts. If you're really worried about resonant frequencies like this, there's a number of tools, something like Soothe 2, which is actually a lot better suited for that because it does it dynamically. We can show you. We'll just take this bass line that we had now. So we want to get rid of some of those dominant resonances. Even though this is not really a great candidate for reducing resonances, it'd be better on something like a piano or acoustic instruments where this kind of thing, or vocal, for example, where this kind of thing is more prevalent. A synthesized bass like this, quite often all these little cuts and things is a bit overkill for me. I'd much rather actually be doing that in the actual synth itself and rectifying those problems from a sound design level. But let's dial in this. And you can see Soothe will move those resonances down dynamically, and depending on where the key changes as well, it'll adjust for that. So that is something that you can do rather than this. So in closing, this is not to say that you should never be doing surgical EQ cuts. By all means, you should be doing that if the need arises, but only when the need arises. And it needs to be an educated decision as to why you're doing it. Something like a saw bass, for example, is a harmonically rich sound as it is. So yes, sure, there are going to be frequencies in there which may be unpleasant. That's part of what makes up the sound. And those are only going to be visible to you when you are boosting them like that. So by boosting and sweeping through, you're finding those sounds which are inherent in the sound that are meant to be there and removing them because that frequency is unpleasant to you. And it's all about context. If you listen to that frequency in context with the rest of the sound without it being boosted, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad frequency in there at all. So just be very aware, EQ always needs to be in context with your mix, in context with the rest of the sounds in that specific, or the rest of the frequencies in that sound that you're working with. Furthermore, I want to kind of use an analogy with a sculptor. You know, EQ should start broad strokes. The same with a sculptor. You have a piece of rock. You don't go in and start working on the fine details immediately. You sculpt the overall appearance of your statue before you start gradually whittling it down to the finer details. EQ should be like that as well. You don't dive in and start making surgical cuts with problems that aren't actually there. You start off with the broad strokes. It's going to be far more effective kind of having broad strokes EQ, fitting in your elements into your frequency domain like that, rather than creating Swiss cheese out of all your audio with all these minor surgical cuts. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion and learned something valuable from this video. I'll catch you soon right here at Sonic Academy. Till then, cheers.
Thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate all the support from you guys. If you love this video, then smash a like, and if you want to be notified about new videos, hit the subscribe and notification buttons. Peace!